I want to wish everybody a belated Happy Earth Day. Not birthday, but birthday. People around the world celebrated Earth Day this past Thursday, April 22nd. And as I was getting ready for our talk here today, I came across some interesting facts that I thought you ought to know. Well, yes, the first Earth Day was celebrated on April 22nd, 1970. It is grown to become the largest secular observation in the world, observed by over 1 billion people living in 192 countries. It's a day that's aimed at increasing environmental awareness, changing personal behaviors, especially those related to energy and water conservation, recycling, and the use of clean energy, and promoting environmentally friendly policies at the local, national, and global scales. The idea of Earth Day began with just one man, Senator Gaylord Nelson, who was a junior senator from Wisconsin. He was concerned about the environment, especially after witnessing the damage caused by the 1969 Santa Barbara spill and reading the book Silent Spring and watching the Cuyahoga River near Cincinnati catching fire. Sawyer, can you show that slide? Yeah, apparently this wasn't the first time that the river caught fire. It was sparked by a spark from a passing train, and the water was so toxically polluted with flammable liquids that, yes, it actually caught fire. So Nelson's idea was to have a one-day event on college campuses around the country at which students could learn about environmental problems and the actions that they could take to make the situation better. He enlisted the aid of an environmental activist named Dennis Hayes to organize the event, and together they picked April 22nd because it was a weekday in that span of time between college spring break and final exams. And you can put the slide down now, thank you. Hayes understood that American public sentiment was shifting. So he proposed expanding upon the original idea to include all Americans, not just students. He suggested changing the name of the event to Earth Day. And boy, was that the right move. When the name changed, it caught the attention of the national media outlets. And word got around and people got organized. And even Dennis Hayes, was surprised when 20 million people turned out for rallies, marches, and other Earth Day activities. The next slide, if you please, Sawyer. You might not remember, but at that point in time, 20 million people represented 10% of the United States population. And so thousands upon thousands of people came out in New York City and San Francisco and Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., and just about every place in between to march, protest, and to hear about why action was needed to protect the environment. Thank you, Sawyer. You take it down. The rest, as they say, is history. There was a groundswell of public support for pro-environmental policies, and action was felt across the political spectrum as well as across the country. And Congress responded. In the 8 months that followed the first Earth Day, Congress passed a slew of laws related to the environment. They created the Environmental Protection Agency. They passed the National Environmental Policy Act. They passed the Clean Air Act and the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Not long thereafter came the Clean Water Act, and then the Endangered Species Act a year after that. And since the 1970s, these and other laws have protected millions of people from death and disease due to environmental pollution. They've promoted the sustainable use of natural resources, and they saved hundreds of plant and animal species from going extinct. Now, it would be fair for you to ask, okay, what does this have to do with today's sermon? My point in telling you all about the start of Earth Day is to highlight what the ideas and actions of even one person can do to create a shift in our collective consciousness. After all the improvements we've seen in the last 50 years, it's hard for us to imagine a time when we didn't have clean air to breathe, or clean water to drink, or clean rivers and streams, to swim in, when we didn't have homes without lead paints or asbestos to live in. All of these benefits can be traced directly back to that first birthday and the tremendous growth in environmental awareness that was started by just a few people who answered their inner call. Rachel Carson, Gaylord Nelson, and Dennis Hayes were all strangers to each other, but they and other scientists, activists, politicians, and ordinary people shared the same sense of purpose: to make the world a better place by protecting the environment for themselves and for future generations. The power of this idea united and inspired them all and led to a shift in how we think about nature and our place in it, which continues up to this day. Imagine how different and how much poorer our lives would be if they had shied away from playing their parts in the story. It isn't very hard. Each of these people must have had at least one good reason for not getting involved. It's also safe to assume that each of them had second thoughts along the way. And yet, despite their individual doubts and fears, all three people persisted in their work. Rachel writing her book, Gaylord building political support, and Dennis organizing volunteers. Each of them demonstrated a considerable amount of personal courage, and dedication, and commitment to a cause bigger than themselves. Like them, we too are sometimes called to step out of our comfort zone and serve a cause bigger than ourselves. For some people, it's a call to serve our community by becoming a first responder, or teacher, or medical professional. For others, it's a call to assist those among us who are most in need by serving as a social worker, or a volunteer, or a political activist. Of course, serving a higher call doesn't always mean a career change. People in all walks of life can and do feel the urge to make a positive difference in the world. Now, I'm going out on a limb here, but I suggest that we each have a moral obligation to do so. There's a story in the Christian Bible regarding this point. In the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 12, Jesus, the way shower, tells his disciples a story, a parable, about the owner of a house who leaves to attend a wedding in another town and places his affairs in the hands of a steward. Now, before I go on any further, I need to point out that this story, the one I'm talking about, has multiple interpretations. Many Christian theologians say that Jesus was telling his disciples that their role in spreading the gospel would not be easy. Others say it was Jesus' way of foretelling his second coming on Judgment Day. But a metaphysical interpretation is a different take on it. Looking at this story through a metaphysician's eyes, we realize that Jesus wasn't talking about either one of these things. Rather, he was suggesting that for those of us who have an elevated consciousness, there's a moral obligation to serve as responsible stewards of the collective consciousness. Stu, can you please put up the next slide? You've probably heard this before. It's been recited 1,000 times. From them to whom much is given, much will be required. And from the one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded. Thank you, sir. Personally, I believe that Jesus had a point. I believe that those of us who have a deeper understanding of who we are and where we stand and the big picture, those of us who are in touch with our inner spirit and recognize that appearances aren't always what they seem to be, do have an obligation that we are called upon by our inner spirit to help in the continued evolution of our consciousness by bringing that forth not necessarily by standing on the street corner and reciting Earth's homes, but rather living from a conscious point of view, from standing firm in our awareness and finding opportunities to bring it forth. It's a challenge that I've taken on, and I encourage you to think long and hard about. So when you listen to the voice of spirit inside, that small, still voice, what is it you hear? What's your cause? What's your vision? If you find these questions difficult to answer, here's an exercise to make it easier for you. The next time you sit down to meditate, have a pencil or pen and a piece of paper available to write on. And at the top of the paper, write the following words. Sawyer, if you please. Write these words and then put the paper down next to you. I can make the world a better place by blank, blank, blank. Thank you, Sawyer. And then, as you meditate, open up your heart and your mind to divine guidance. Listen for that voice. Now, don't be concerned if nothing specific comes through the first time. Even if it's a vague feeling, an image, or impression, that's enough to get you started. When your meditation is complete, jot down any thoughts or ideas that may come up. With time and repetition, the picture will become more clear. And then it's time to get off the cushion. If that way doesn't work for you, here's another way which may suit you better. Our parent organization, the Center for Spiritual Living, has a global vision document entitled A World That Works for Everyone, which identifies 8 changes in consciousness or condition that will help bring about such a world. I invite you to go online and check this out and see what part of that statement resonates with you. Then prayerfully consider how you might help bring it about. As the author, speaker, and former presidential candidate, Marianne Williamson said, Sawyer, if you please, each one of us has a unique part to play in the healing of the world. Should your call be a lofty one, go ahead and embrace it. Remember, we are all part of the one. None of us is ever alone. Thank you, Sawyer. We are all loved and supported by God, the source of all there is, by whose grace we receive everything we need. On the other hand, don't be too concerned if you think your part is small. Every single contribution helps to raise the collective consciousness. You never know what word or action, however small, might make a big difference for somebody else. And I have a personal example to share. And I don't mean to sound anything special about myself, but rather this is an example that I know firsthand and I wanted to share. It was that during that time when I was working back in Washington, D.C., living on one side of the town and working on the direct opposite side, riding the subway or metro from one place to the other. I normally tried to get to work early so I could leave work early and avoid the major rush hour crowd. But then one day I couldn't avoid it. I had to do some extra work and wound up getting on the metro train that was fully packed. I was standing next to the door, and this was during the time when I was taking my foundations class, learning about the science of mind. And as I stood there and the train moved on, I looked out over the people sitting down and the others standing around me. And I had the thought of, these are all the faces of God. God showing up as woman and man and child, all types of colors and all types of clothing, all types of ages. occupations. It was clear. And what a blessing this was. As I was in this frame of mind, this loving, compassionate frame of mind, we pulled into the next station. And the doors opened up, and somebody, a young man who was seated in the very front row near me, jumped up and pushed me out of the way to get out the door. I fell back against the side of the subway car. And all I could think was compassion. All I could think was, he must be late for something very important. Well, the doors of the train closed, and I went and I sat down in the seat that he had left empty. The woman who was sitting next to me now turned to me and said, "That young man was very rude." And I thought it for a second, and I said to her, without even, putting thought into it, "I'm sure that he had something very important to do." And a puzzled look came over her face, like, okay. Well, just then, I reached down into my bag and I pulled out a book by Ralph Waldo Emerson, Selected Essays, Lectures, and Poems. This was a textbook for that program I was in, and I started reading it. And so she asked me about Emerson. Now I had to explain that Emerson was one of the early thinkers about God being outside of the church and being in nature and how we're all connected. And, I was just telling her what I was learning about. And she grew more and more interested. Well, eventually our train pulled into the station, our station, it turns out. And she said, "How can I learn more about this?" I said, "Well, there's a Center for Spiritual Living here in town, and we get together on Sundays at 10 o'clock. You're welcome to check it out." Never expecting anything to come from it, to be honest. But sure enough, the next Sunday, there she was. And she came the next Sunday, and the Sunday after that, and became a full-time member of the center. And so this random act and random words turned out to have a pretty significant impact on her, at least, and perhaps even in a wider sense. So don't ever think that it doesn't matter. It really does matter. Trying to be in that state of consciousness of knowing who you are and how it all fits together. Each of us has a unique purpose that nobody else on the planet can fulfill. And if we choose to ignore our purpose, to live small, not only are we missing out, so is the world. And the world needs you to step out of your comfort zone and step up into who you have come here to be. Here's another great quote. Sawyer, can you share that last slide? It comes from the Swami Vivekananda. He said, "Things do not grow better," almost, you can see paraphrased, "by themselves. They remain as they are. It is we who grow better by the changes we make in ourselves." Thank you, Sawyer. You are a one of a kind. You are the only you who ever was, is, or ever will be. This is your opportunity to bring forth the very best side of yourself. This is your time to shine. Let's take this to prayer. Mother, Father, God, we are all here by divine appointment. We are all here to live out our lives in human form, knowing that in our essence, we are part of the divine. We are part of that which is. And we each have a part to play. be it small, be it large, or somewhere in between. There's something for each of us to do while here in human form, to bring forth a higher state of affairs, a higher sense of awareness, a higher sense of connection, a higher sense of the divine presence here on earth. May we always stay in the consciousness of love and peace and understanding, knowing that things happen, random events happen, and it's how we respond that matters. We can't always change our circumstances, but we can change how we react. May we always react with love, peace, compassion, and understanding. May we become vehicles for the expression of all these divine qualities. May we play our part in bringing forth a world that works for everyone. May we always remember we are part of the one. With great joy, with great gratitude, with great humility, I release this word, knowing it is so, as together we say, so it is.